Tier 1, we're going to go Josh Allen, Jaden Daniels, Lamar Jackson. I know we talk about this a lot in Dynasty, and I don't have the right answer, but I am very interested to know how these quarterbacks are going to age that rely on athleticism to be elite fantasy options. Now, I'm not saying that Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson, they're not going to be effective real-life NFL quarterbacks at 32 years old. They very easily could be. But if we no longer see Josh Allen giving you 12, 13, 14, 50 rushing touchdowns in a season, if we no longer see Lamar Jackson averaging 50 rushing yards per game, do they fall from being elite QB1s in their mid to late 20s down to being, I don't know, low-end quarterback ones when they progress into their 30s? That would be a potential concern that you have, but obviously, in the short to immediate term, these are going to be absolute crushers that if you are able to grab yourself two of these top tier options, it's going to be extremely difficult for the rest of your league mates to actually catch up in a super flex league. Going over and looking at Jaden Daniels, yes, he comes through and he's the quarterback 6 as a rookie. Definitely was a much older rookie, right? He's already going to be 25 years old in his second season. But he also averaged 50 rushing yards per game as a rookie. He's currently getting drafted as the QB3 in redraft leagues. So if he's already getting drafted as the QB3 in redraft formats, I kind of feel comfortable having him here as my QB2 in Dynasty. And now you have Deebo Samuel coming over, but both Deebo as well as Terry McLaurin and Zach Ertz, pretty much every weapon that he has is extremely old. Now, dropping down to our next tier, Jalen Herz, Joe Burrow would be two guys that I would have flipped in a redraft. But from a Dynasty perspective, I'm maybe a little bit more concerned of how Jalen Herz will age in comparison to Joe Burrow, because obviously so much of the Hertz production comes from what you are getting as a rusher, with him for 3 straight seasons averaging almost a rushing touchdown per game. And if Jalen Hertz is still doing the tush push at 30 years old, is that I would assume that's not going to be a recipe to stay healthy for the long term in Dynasty. I'm assuming at some point we are going to see that kind of stray away from Jalen Hertz as he ages. And again, I would be maybe a little bit concerned with those quarterbacks that are elite options now based off their rushing ability, turning into like low-end QB1s if 10% or 50% of that ends up going away. Joe Burrow, he's older than Jalen Hertz by a couple of years, but I think that he is just the prototypical quarterback that's going to age well into his mid to late 30s. But also, if you're a contender, clearly you just take Jalen Hertz because there, over the next 2 to 3 seasons, Hertz should outscore Burrow in a 4-point passing touchdown league. Now, I did change this in our Dynasty rankings after the NFL draft. I flipped Caleb Williams and Patrick Mahomes. I put Caleb up here already as our quarterback 6. This is despite Caleb Williams being the quarterback 20 from a points per game perspective as a rookie. Obviously not nearly as exciting as what a lot of people thought he would be. But I am just projecting out, looking at how this situation changed from 2024 to 2025 and what it will be going into the future. Because now Caleb Williams is surrounded by a much better offensive line. Caleb Williams is surrounded by a much better coaching staff, a much better skill positional group where you have Rome Odunze going into year 2. You have Luther Burden as a rookie. You have Loveland as a rookie, and you have DJ Moore in his prime. So if we are projecting this out for Chicago over the next few seasons, it's not like Loveland, Luther Burden, or Rome Odunze are going to be worse in 2026, 2027 than they would be now. Like, the situation is already great in Chicago as it stands today in June 2025. And I think it may only get better going into the future. Caleb only going to be 24 years old this next season. So I'm fine putting him here. Looking at Patrick Mahomes, I know a lot of people would say, well, Mason, Mahomes disappointed last year and he disappointed the year before. Yes, back-to-back seasons averaging only about 17.5 fantasy points per game. Absolute garbage for Mahomes standards, where typically we've seen him anywhere from about 20.5 to 26 fantasy points per game from 2018 through 2022 in that 5-year stretch. Now, even the worst Patrick Mahomes seasons you're ever going to get, he's the QB 11 and the QB 13 in points per game. And those are the worst Mahomes years you're ever going to find. So if the floor is like QB 11, QB 13, and the ceiling is quarterback 1 overall in fantasy, he's only going to be 30 this next season. So you presumably have a decade of value with Mahomes. I don't see how this isn't just his rock bottom floor price. Like, I've been doing a lot of mock drafts on the side as of late, and a lot of those mocks I hop into, at least the public mock draft lobbies, Patrick Mahomes is going in the second round of Superflex startups. And 100%, if you're taking him in the second round, I don't see how his price point dips below that 12 months from now. Now, going over to our next quarterback, we are going to have Drake May. Now, I stand by everything I've said with May this offseason. While, yes, he showed a very impressive rookie year. While if you're looking at points per game numbers, he was the QB 25, blah, 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 blah. We all know he didn't play every single game completely. Like, you can go back and look at the Jets game where he only plays enough to have 8 pass attempts. Look at the second Jets game where he plays only enough to have 6 pass attempts. Look at the Buffalo game where he only has 1 passing attempt. Like, you can throw those out the window. And in the games that Drake May actually played, he was the QB 10, 7, 18, 16, 14, 17, 10, 11, 16, and 27. So arguably a better season than what you had from Caleb Williams. And this was with an absolute garbage supporting cast. And now you have a much better coaching staff here in New England. Drake May is only going to be 23 years old. I just don't necessarily see how, like, the New England Patriots set Drake May up for success from a fantasy perspective in the short to mediate term. Because if we're looking at what this team did this offseason, in a bad wide receiver draft class, they take a wide receiver in round 3. They go out there and they sign a 32-year-old wide receiver who is just a wide receiver 3 in his previous offense, now coming off a torn ACL. I would make the argument that while the New England Patriots maybe made the right moves from like a real-life NFL perspective to win football games, if we were trying to see Drake May have 40, 50 dropbacks a game and elevate his play to be a mid QB1 in Dynasty over the next 3 seasons, probably you're not going to see that. But great quarterback, probably a much better NFL team this next season. And you can obviously hope that maybe you end up getting the New England Patriots bringing in some true wide receiver help in the 2026 offseason. Now let's go ahead and let's look at Bo Nix. With Bo Nix, very similar to Jaden Daniels, obviously was an older rookie. All we're going to be 25 years old this next season. But also very similar to Jaden Daniels, he absolutely crushed last year. He was the QB8. If we go through and if we actually look at these game logs, however, and of course, you can check all this stuff out on flockfantasy.com for free. If we remove the first month of the season and look at weeks 5 onwards for Bo Nix, which I think is fair to do, the dude was a rookie. He was the QB 8, 9, 19, 2, 14, 12, 4, 7, 26, 14, 15, 13, 2. He was a viable streamer in redraft leagues as a rookie. Now, similar to what we saw with like Drake May, it's not like the Denver Broncos went out there and did a ton to invest into the supporting cast with Bo Nix. They bring in a couple running backs with RJ Harvey and J.K. Dobbins, but in reality, I would say the Denver Broncos have one of the worst wide receiver 2 through 4 depth charts in the entire NFL. But Bo Nix, extremely young, should be able to help a contender right now, especially if you're playing in a Superflex league and you're able to have Bo Nix as your quarterback too, which obviously we review a bunch of teams on the site, and that's what I see very often. Very rarely do I see somebody have Bo Nix as their true QB1 in Dynasty unless it was a startup done this offseason, because typically teams that took Bo Nix in the early second round of their Dynasty rookie drafts last year already had a solidified guy, whether that was somebody like Patrick Mahomes, Jaylen, Herz, etc., etc. Now, let's go over and let's look at Justin Herbert. Herbert is somebody that I recently had to move down our ranks because I want to sit here and I want to go, okay, well, if we look at the larger sample, Justin Herbert is an incredible real-life quarterback. Like, Herbert is only going to be 2 years older than what we have with these guys like Bo Nix and Jaden Daniels, and we've seen just phenomenal seasons with him going through and averaging close to 300 passing yards per game, with him going through and averaging over 7 adjusted yards per pass attempt. Now, obviously, you're not really going to get the rushing upside. And now what we saw in 2024 in comparison to what we had the previous 5 seasons of his NFL career, you're just not going to have the passing volume. I mean, with Justin Herbert, it was the first year of his NFL career averaging fewer than 30 passing attempts per game. They go out there and they sign Najee Harris in the offseason, and at the same time, they draft Barry Hampton round 1. So indications are, yep, this is going to be a team that continues to run the ball over and over and over again. But maybe similar to the Mahomes argument, you just know that he's so damn good, he's going to be a starter forever. And at the same time, even with the passing volume falling through the floor this past year, you're still the QB 13 from a points per game perspective. So maybe you are kind of getting him near his floor. Now, going over to our next quarterback, I had to drop him down as well because I'm still very much a believer in CJ Shroud. Like, let me be on the record here. And that while CJ Shroud had a very disappointing season last year as the QB 27, 6.1 adjusted yards per pass attempt, if you go back and look at Stroud's rookie season, from a passing perspective, it was better than what you had from Bo Nix. It was arguably better than what you had from Jaden Daniels from a passer's perspective, where you had 8.1 adjusted yards per pass attempt for Shroud, in comparison to 7 adjusted yards per pass attempt for Jaden Daniels. CJ Shroud as a rookie was sitting here averaging only 1 interception like every 3 games. I mean, the man had 5 interceptions to a total of 23 passing touchdowns as a rookie. Now, year 2, it's disgusting. The offensive line is worse. But also, I would make an argument, the wide receiver core is now set up to be in a much better spot in the long term. You bring in both Higgins and Knoll. This is a team that, yes, maybe is going to try to run the ball, but I mean, are you really going to be able to be successful at that with the offensive line that you have? My hesitation with ranking Shroud higher than this in Dynasty is truly just where he's going in redraft leagues at the moment. Y'all know we're streaming Underdog drafts at this point every single night. And if you're going to just take a look at where CJ Stroud's getting drafted there for what his expectations are for like contending teams this season, Stroud's currently going as like a low-end QB2. CJ Stroud's a QB 20 off the board. So like, how am I going to go through and rank this dude as like a QB 7 in Dynasty if in redraft he's getting drafted as a QB 20 and I don't think age matters that much at quarterback? I will say he's younger than Bo Nix. He's younger than Jaden Daniels. I mean, he's only going to be 24 years old this next season, which is just incredible. Going over looking at Cam Ward, I am way higher on Cam Ward, I guess, than anybody else on the site. I have Cam Ward ranked at 37th overall in my rankings, and it looks like the expert average on the site actually has him around 50th. My thought process with Cam Ward is number 1 overall NFL draft pick. If he comes out and puts in a Bo Nix, Jaden Daniels, or CJ Shroud rookie season, realistically, Cam Ward can be a first-round starter pick 12 months from now. I know that sounds crazy, but it is in the range of outcomes. If you go back and look at where we were last offseason, Caleb Williams goes number 1 overall in the NFL draft, and in a very strong draft class with very strong options at the top, it's consensus Caleb Williams is the 101 in rookie drafts. This year, Cam Ward goes number 1 overall in the NFL draft, and it's consensus that he's like the 105, 106. I don't know. I like just the insulation that you're getting, especially if you're a rebuilding team with the range of outcomes for where Cam Ward's value can be 12 months from now, depending on what happens in his rookie season. If you're looking at where he's getting drafted in redraft leagues in comparison to some of these other guys, he's going pretty damn close to like CJ Shroud with the expectations at the moment. Like Cam Ward's QB 26 in comparison to Shroud at QB 20. But of course, if you wanted to actually get in some real fantasy football drafts, at this point, you'll know we're drafting every single day on Underdog Fantasy. I'll leave a link in the description and the comment section. And again, if you wanted to draft with us, it's going to be on the Flock Fantasy YouTube channel, the main YouTube channel that we have. Well, they're best ball drafts, so no time commitment at all during the season. It's how I draft hundreds of teams every year. And if you're somehow not already on Underdog, you can find that link in the description as well as the comment section. And if you use promo code FLOCK, you'll get a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. Plus, on top of that, you're going to be getting all our 2025 fantasy football draft guides and cheat sheets for your leagues on Sleeper, Yahoo, ESPN, etc., etc., etc. Now, going over and looking at what we have with Jordan Love. Love's going to be 27 years old this next season. If you're looking at the long-term outlook, I mean, the Packers are bringing in some young depth out wide receivers, so possibly the supporting cast looks to be a little bit better. Now, obviously, the passing volume did come down dramatically for Jordan Love from his first season as a starter to the second year, averaging about 34 passing attempts per game in year 1, and then about 28 passing attempts per game in year 2 as one of the rush heaviest offenses. But he was a super efficient passer at 7.7 adjusted yards per pass attempt. And maybe you can make an argument, oh, okay, well, Jordan Love just had this significant injury in week 1. If y'all remember, we thought Love was going to be out for an insane amount of time. And then the man rushes himself back in week 4. Maybe he was just a little too early, because you actually did see Jordan Love run the ball a lot less last season in comparison to what he did his first year as a starter, actually falling from about 14.5 rushing yards per game down to 5.5. So if Love's a little bit more mobile, a little bit healthier, I think you could see him improve overall. I'm going over and looking at Baker Mayfield's. Baker, you get the contract. You get surprisingly a phenomenal wide receiver prospect in round 1 going to Tampa with Igbuka, coming off the best year of his NFL career where he's the QB4 in points per game. He's already 30, but keep in mind, Baker doesn't really rely on athleticism too much. I know he did have 22 rushing yards per game this past season, but that was by far and away the best mark that we've seen through his NFL career. And what's kind of crazy is Baker Mayfield's getting drafted as the QB7 in redraft leagues at the moment. And Godwin is going to be there for a couple of years. Even if this is Evans' last season, you do have Igbuka who should be able to take that step forward in year 2. Going over and looking at Kyler Murray, I feel like I am ahead of the market for Kyler Murray in a redraft, while somehow behind the market with him in Dynasty, because he's the QB8 off the board in redraft. And I actually think that's kind of priced towards his floor, where you've seen the lowest mark that we've ever had from Kyler Murray as the QB12 in points per game. But in Dynasty, where I'm sitting him here inside the same tier with Baker, Love, Cam Ward, and CJ Shroud, looking at the average expert ranking, looks like the average experts on the site actually have him closer to like Justin Herbert than we do, which I completely understand it, because again, I think in the short term, Kyler's set up to absolutely crush. But given Kyler's size, as well as given the injury history that we have as well, I'm a little bit concerned of what the rushing production is going to look like 2-3 years down the road. And if we do lose any of the athleticism with Kyler Murray, if he does have to be more of just a pocket passing quarterback, we're not going to get the 5-6 carries per game. We're not going to get the 30 to 35 rushing yards per game. I do think that the longevity may not be here with Kyler the same way that it maybe would with Baker. But in redraft leagues, I actually love Kyler at his current price point. Going over looking at our next quarterback with Lawrence, I had to move Lawrence up after the NFL draft. Full transparency, I'm not a big Lawrence guy. Like with Lawrence, if we're just looking at his historical adjusted yards per pass attempt and trying to be as objective about this as possible, Lawrence has been a very bad NFL quarterback. Now, Lawrence, you have things to blame this on, but 4.9, 7.0, 6.3, 6.5 adjusted yards per pass attempt. Lawrence has been bad almost every year of his NFL career outside of his second season. Now, with that in mind, Trevor Lawrence had arguably one of the worst coaching staffs in NFL history his rookie season. Over the past 3 years, maybe it wasn't that much better. And then now you have Liam Cohen coming over, and I know a lot of people are excited that this is finally going to unlock Lawrence. And at the same time, with Trevor Lawrence, to be fair to him, he is still very, very young. Trevor Lawrence is only going to be 26 years old this next season. Like, the dude's like 1 year older than Bo Nix, Jaden Daniels. And you have Travis Hunter coming in. You have Brian Thomas Jr. taking a step forward in year 2. So Lawrence possibly has the best supporting cast of his career, the best coaching staff of his career, and maybe the cheapest he's ever been. So it could make a lot of sense to buy low on Lawrence. I just think you have to at least be realistic and acknowledge that the starting point with Lawrence is he's been bad. I'm going over and looking at Brock Purdy. It seems like Purdy is trending towards 12 months from now having probably the worst supporting cast of his career. The reason being is obviously, 1, Purdy gets the big new contract. 2, if we're going to be looking at the supporting cast with how it stands now, you have like a 1 year wonder or a couple week wonder in Juwan Jennings. You have Ayuk aging and injured. You have McCaffrey aging. I don't necessarily know McCaffrey is going to be somebody that we can consistently rely upon 2-3 years down the road. And we have an unproven Ricky Pearsall and Deebo Samuel's already out of town. So with Purdy, I think you could very easily have him higher than this if you wanted to. I mean, he was the QB 10 in points per game last season with a very bad supporting cast. And he's also only going to be 26 years old this next season. McCarthy, all the upside in the world. Michael Penix, I'd say the same thing. We really haven't seen anything from either quarterback. You can pull up the game logs on the site and see that Michael Penix, over the past 3 weeks, he had 27, 35, and 38 pass attempts. So, a decent little sample. But overall, he only had a total of 105 pass attempts last year, 6.4 adjusted yards per pass attempt. It's not like Michael Penix was the best quarterback ever by any stretch of the imagination, right? And McCarthy, we had a good throw in the preseason. So I'm more so looking at the expectations for these guys coming into this next year with their supporting cast. And I would say that McCarthy has a phenomenal coaching staff, has arguably the best receiver in the league, and on top of that has a great number 2 with Jordan Addison and a great tight end with TJ Hawkinson. Michael Penix has a great receiver with Drake London. Michael Penix flashed. Penix, definitely one of these older quarterbacks, very similar to Daniels, very similar to Bo Nix. Stayed forever in college, obviously had just a crazy way that his collegiate career went, where McCarthy is going to be a little bit of that younger option, only going to be 22 years old this next year. Now, I did recently move Goff down below these other quarterbacks because I'm a little bit concerned that we may see some regression with this Lions offense, not only with them losing Ben Johnson, but also now with the offensive line downgrade that we should get with them no longer having an all-pro center there, which we thought they would for years based off his age. But hell, Lions are going to retire early. That's what we know. And if we're looking at Jared Goff, we know we have no rushing upside whatsoever. So I think you're just kind of getting a consistent quarterback 2 with not much fantasy football upside in general. You've had 0 seasons of his NFL career, and he's been drafted back in 2016, 0 years with over 20 fantasy points per game. So I think you know what you're getting. Going over and looking at Dak Prescott, you could very easily make an argument to have Dak ahead of Goff. And honestly, as we're looking at this, I think we probably should, because Dak Prescott's only 1 year older than Jared Goff. And at the same time, Dak Prescott's had a total of 4 seasons with at least 20 fantasy points. He still have CeeDee Lamb in his prime. And now you're getting George Pickens coming over, young George Pickens as well, that may re-sign after this season. And it seems like Dak should be fully healthy going into this next year. So if you wanted to put Dak ahead of him, not going to fault you at all. Going over and looking at Bryce Young, very similar to what we did with Trevor Lawrence, we have to at least have a starting point, right? We have to be on the same page that Bryce Young has been a horrible quarterback so far in his NFL career. He's looked a lot better in the second half of the season. You can look at the final 5-week stretch and see that Bryce Young goes through, and he has some weeks against the Atlanta Falcons in kind of a meaningless game. He's the number 1 overall quarterback in fantasy in week 18, right? But 9.2 adjusted yards per pass attempt that week, 8.7, 7.6, 5.3, 4.9, 6.9, 8.1 to round out the season. Bryce Young looked good at the very end of the year. But if we're just going to look at both seasons, 5.5 and 6.3 yards per pass attempt, 4.5, 5.6 adjusted yards per pass attempt, because the dude was throwing almost as many interceptions as passing touchdowns. So Bryce Young's been very bad, but he has a better coaching staff than he used to. And this is now probably going to be the best supporting cast of his career, with Leggett going into year 2, Coker going into year 2, and then bringing Ted McMillan in as well. Looking at our next tier, we're going to have Tua and Jackson Dart. With Tua, surprisingly young, going to be 27 years old this next year. Here's something that I don't know the answer to. If Tua did not have the most brutal looking concussions in primetime games, would people make as big of a deal out of it? Because every time we've seen Tua go down and everybody's held their breath and it seemed like, oh my gosh, we may have somebody dying on the football field. It's been in a primetime game. I can tell you where I was both times we've seen that happen. Once, I was at Pluckers in Austin with the girlfriend. It was insane, sports bar, everybody going, oh my gosh. Second time, Sal and I were hanging out at the house and we were just talking and I was like, oh, holy crap. That was both, I think, were Thursday night games. In reality, if Tua is able to stay upright, he's been effective in fantasy as a quarterback 2 in Dynasty Superflex leagues. If he is healthy, reasonable expectations should be that, I don't know, you're starting him every single week in your QB2 slot. Maybe when you get to December and the cold weather comes around, then at that point you have to be a little bit concerned. But if he's healthy, the job security should be there. Long-term, maybe you don't know what the Jonnu, Tyreek, Waddle core looks like. I'm going over and looking at Jackson Dart. The draft capital isn't the same as Cam Ward's. Like, if Jackson Dart ends up coming through and he's a mid-quarterback one in fantasy this next year, he's not going to be a round one starter pick next offseason. And then at the same time, if we're going to be looking at what we have with the floor, if Jackson Dart's horrible, the Giants will replace him next offseason. Like, if Cam Ward's horrible, the Titans have to give Cam Ward like 3 more years. We've seen it with Lawrence. We've seen it with Bryce Young. We've seen it with every round one, number 1 overall pick that gets selected since like Jamarcus Russell. They're going to get the longest leash possible. And Jackson Dart, that's probably not going to happen with, but he's set up with Malik Neighbors, one of the best young receivers in the league. Going over and looking at Justin Fields. Fields is getting drafted like crazy high in underdog drafts at the moment. Like, Justin Fields in redraft leagues, like the QB 10 off the board. And yeah, I mean, you have Garrett Wilson, and at the same time, you have all the rushing upside in the world. But if Justin Fields is bad, he's probably never going to be starting ever again. This is like his last year. If we're looking at Geno Smith, Geno Smith's contract indicate that he's probably going to be a multi-year starter. But even with that in mind, like Geno Smith over the past few seasons, 1, he's 35 years old. And 2, you don't really have QB1 overall upside just because he's not really going to run the ball much. Going and looking at Sam Darnold, Darnold's deal really just looks like a 1-year contract. And Darnold just has so much stink with him that even though he comes through and he puts up the best year of his NFL career with 7.5 adjusted yards per pass attempt, based off the meltdown in the playoffs, he still doesn't really get any respect and doesn't get the contract this offseason. So what's the real upside for his value to move? Looking at Stafford, yes, you can start him for this year. You can have him more so as your QB3 in Dynasty, but he's going to be 37 years old, so you're not going to have him too long. No rushing upside whatsoever. And he's only averaged like 13.5 through 16.5 fantasy points per game over the past 3 seasons. I'm dropping down to our next tier. Anthony Richardson, if he were to be a starting quarterback, you can probably put him in your starting lineup and you can probably get some production in a 4-point passing touchdown format, just given the rushing upside. But Anthony Richardson may never start again. Tyler Suggs probably going to start, but you're probably not going to be able to put him in your lineup. Daniel Jones may end up being the starting quarterback for the Indianapolis Colts, but I'd rather have Anthony Richardson because if Richardson starts, I'm putting him in my QB2 slot. I can't say the same thing about Daniel Jones. Rodgers, you get a 1-year rental in Pittsburgh. Jalen Milroe, you definitely have more long-term upside, but Milroe has the draft capital that indicates he may never start. We just have no idea. But I really appreciate you. Really hope I was able to help you out with anything in this. And of course, I will be drafting every single night on the live stream over there on Underdog. I would love if you drafted with me. You can find the link to Underdog Fantasy in the description as well as the comment section. I'm sure you're already on there, but just in case you're not, it's best ball, so there's no time commitment at all during the season. It's not going to take away from your Dynasty teams whatsoever, just some added fun on the side. And if you use promo code FLOCK, you'll get a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. Plus, you'll get all my rankings, draft guide cheat sheets for 2025 for your Yahoo leagues, for your sleeper leagues, for your ESPN leagues. And I think that's all I got for you. I really appreciate you, and I really hope I get to see you out with the live stream later tonight.